Located on the Chattahoochee River in the northwest corner of Atlanta, the Chattahoochee Brick Company was a crossroads of cultures, a pivot point in history, a place where making the building blocks for the reconstruction of Atlanta collided with the Southern efforts to replace the use of enslaved labor in what Doug Blackman called slavery by another name, the use of leased prison labor. The factory was built on the lands of the Muskogee Indians. The American Indian Peachtree Trail followed the high ground along the Chattahoochee River bordering the site. That trail met several others at Standing Peachtree, a village located on both banks of the river at the confluence of Peachtree Creek and the Chattahoochee. Standing Peachtree contained earthen mounds like those seen at Etowah and Okmulgee, with fields and homes established up and down river. This likely included the land that became the Chattahoochee Brick Company. Peaches had been brought to the southeast by Spanish missionaries and were a favored crop of American Indians, including the Cherokee and the Muskogee, who grew them at Standing Peachtree until conflict and treaties led to their removal from these lands. The village, the trail by its name, as well as Fort Peachtree, established as a frontier fort during the War of 1812, all introduced Peachtree into the nomenclature of the future city of Atlanta. Peachtree is not the only word the Muskogee contributed to the Atlanta lexicon. Chattahoochee itself is a Muskogee word and means painted rock or marked rock. While this name might refer to American Indian petroglyphs or pictographs, it is also possible that the name Chattahoochee was given to the river because of the dense red clay deposits in the area, which may have painted the rocks red during floods. The red clay banks of the Chattahoochee provided the raw material needed to manufacture bricks. In the years after the Civil War, as Atlanta rebuilt, Sherman's burning of the city was a recent memory and the benefit of building with fire-resistant brick obvious. 2 brick plants were located in this area by the early 1880s. In 1885, these were merged to form Chattahoochee Brick. While the new company had multiple owners, James W. English became the president and dominant force behind the company. The East Tennessee, Virginia, and Georgia Railroad was constructed in 1882 to 83 adjacent to the site and spurred the expansion of the brick production on the property. Convicted prisoners, leased from the state of Georgia, provided the labor at the factory. The Chattahoochee River was key to the location of the brick factory. Banks and pits along the river were mined for clay, which was shipped by tram line and barge to the brick yard. Property maps from the 1890s and 1910s show large land holdings extending down both banks of the river, past present-day Interstate 20, as well as lands to the north. The Chattahoochee Brick Company ultimately owned more than 3,600 acres of land in Fulton, Cobb, and DeKalb counties. Clay was mined, or won, from the pits and banks by shovel and pickaxe in the prison leased labor period, and by machinery at later points in time. Clay was transported to the river's edge adjacent to the factory and then moved to clay piles placed behind the factory. During the leased labor era, the laborers moved the clay using wheelbarrows, which was heavy and demanding work. When leased labor came to an end in 1909, James English and the Chattahoochee Brick Company invested in a double Lawson tramway to move the clay by rail. The Lawson tramway was noted in manufacturing publications of the era as an innovation because it allowed the tram cars to adjust to the height of the water in the Chattahoochee River, since the tram lines ended at 2 different heights. The 1886 Brickmaker's Manual by Robert Morrison recommended that the processing of clay should be organized horizontally, with the clay moving from the riverbank to the factory. Clay was moved to the mixing room where it was mixed with water and bricks formed. The bricks were then moved to the drying room where the green bricks dried with both heat and air. The green bricks were then placed into the kilns where they were fired and hardened. Fired bricks were placed in rail cars for shipment. The Chattahoochee Brick Company fired bricks for several days, longer than other factories, which produced more durable brick. Their bricks were used in many of the late 19th and early 20th century brick buildings in Atlanta, such as the Kimball House, the YMCA, and the Chamber of Commerce, as well as for streets and sidewalks, including those at Oakland Cemetery. R.B. Morrison was an Atlanta resident at the time the Chattahoochee Brick Company was built, and the factory used kilns of his design, known as Morrison stove kilns. These were rectangular updraft kilns fired by coal. Over time, kiln technology would change, and circular oil-fired downdraft kilns were constructed by the early 1940s. Factory buildings were reconstructed at multiple times, and workers' housing transitioned from tenements in 1911 to individual homes along the road into the site by 1925. A native of Louisiana and Confederate veteran James English arrived in Atlanta in 1865. He was a leader in the movement to make Atlanta Georgia's capital, became a banker and investor as well as mayor and police commissioner. Among his investments were shares in 2 of Georgia's 3 authorized penitentiary companies, which were responsible for prisoners of the state, and which in turn leased them to private businesses. It is estimated that his penitentiary businesses controlled 1,206 of the state's 2,881 incarcerated citizens. English leased them to a number of businesses such as mines, railroads, and lumber companies, including ones he owned. Georgia's penitentiary companies, and those in other states, came about because of a loophole in the 13th Amendment. While the 13th Amendment to the Constitution abolished slavery, it contained an exception clause. Slavery was abolished, except as a punishment for crime whereof the party shall have been duly convicted. In Georgia, the black codes made idleness and vagrancy crimes, allowing black men and women to easily be arrested, sentenced, and assigned to a penitentiary company. English would use leased prison labor at the Chattahoochee Brick Company. Roughly 175 prison laborers, the vast majority of them black, worked on the site at any given time, working from sunup to sundown 6 to 7 days a week in demanding labor compounded by the heat of the factory and the weight of the bricks. Their treatment at Chattahoochee Brick was deplorable, as they were fed rotting food, slept in bunks in crowded, insect-infested lodging, received minimal medical treatment, and were whipped. Some died while on the site. The leased laborers lived in barracks that were near the kilns and next to the stables. They wore black and white striped uniforms that were said to mimic the bars on prison doors and windows. These uniforms were easily recognizable in the event a prisoner escaped. However, to prevent escaping, leased laborers at the Chattahoochee Brick Company were shackled in chains and watched by guards carrying guns. 12 barracks were built to house the leased laborers on the site, while other dwellings housed the factory managers, engineers, and guards. In 1908, Georgia abolished prisoner leasing, although not prisoner labor, as the incarcerated were still used for public works projects such as road construction. At the Chattahoochee Brick Company, James English complained about the cost of improving the factory to serve free labor, noting that if his paid workforce disliked the conditions of the factory, that they could vote with their feet. The prison laborers on the site included women and children until around 1900, when the Georgia Prison Commission moved women and children under the age of 16 out of the prison labor leasing program and assigned them to a prison farm outside Milledgeville. Managers who used leased prison labor had no incentive to care for their leased workforce, as there was no economic liability to them if a worker died. As one owner described it, if one died, you just get another. Leased laborers at the Chattahoochee Brick Company are known to have died on the site. Some remains were returned to the state, some were sent to the Atlanta College of Physicians and Surgeons for dissection and medical education. Some may have been cremated in the kilns, and some probably were buried on site. The location of a leased labor cemetery is presently unknown. Richard Becherer, a professor at Kennesaw State University, discovered a 1961 plan for the expansion of the Chattahoochee Brick Company that had been left on the property. This plan included a handwritten note, an arrow for the location of a temporary cemetery. He believed the original cemetery may have been relocated during work on the adjoining railroad. The arrow points to the location that became the walled courtyard, but archaeological studies have not identified burials in that location. The location of the original laborer cemetery and remains from a temporary cemetery are unknown. Brick tunnels lie under the surface on the Chattahoochee Brick Company site and have been explored in the past. These tunnels served as flues, which were used to move air. These flues likely moved warm air from under the kilns to the drying room to support the drying process. Interviews indicate the flues ended in a large chamber under the drying room that had fans to draw the air. Bricks were formed from wet clay, which then had to dry in order to harden before firing in the kiln. The drying room was a large building behind the kilns where this took place. Drawing warm air from the kilns into the drying room was one way to speed up the drying process by using heat generated when firing the kilns. The Chattahoochee Brick Company went through a number of building phases through the 1960s, updating machinery and equipment and reconfiguring how the factory spaces were organized. By this time, customers visited the site itself to inspect its products, as opposed to a downtown showroom that served customers before the age of the automobile. A walled courtyard was used to display the various types of bricks manufactured on the site, and a brick walkway and a figure-8 layout took customers around the display. General Shale took over ownership of the Chattahoochee Brick Company site in 1970 and significantly changed the site's layout. All of the older buildings were demolished and new factory buildings were constructed, predominantly of concrete. General Shale moved the operations upslope from the original core factory areas and shipped their products via truck, which was more cost-effective than rail, with the recently completed I-285 adjacent to the site. General Shale's operations closed in 2010, and the site has remained vacant since that time, with other uses explored before its acquisition by the City of Atlanta in 2022. The City of Atlanta intends to make the Chattahoochee Brick Company site into a park that will memorialize the lives of the prisoners who were forced to work there and be of benefit to the surrounding community, including descendants. Scape Landscape Architecture was hired by the City of Atlanta for the park's planning and design process, and they hired New South Associates to conduct an archaeological survey. The goal of the archaeology was to determine what materials were present on the site and how these might contribute to the park's planning and interpretation. The firm conducted historic research and developed a series of map overlays and Geographic Information System, or GIS, showing where structures had been located at various points in time. They then walked the entire site, mapping the locations of deposits visible on the surface, and excavated shovel test pits in the Chattahoochee River floodplain, whose soil was screened for evidence of American Indian pottery or stone tools. Along the railroad embankment, the archaeologists pushed steel tile probes into the ground to determine if there were any signs of looser soil that might indicate the presence of human graves. The archaeologists then turned to ground-penetrating radar, or GPR. GPR works by sending radar waves into the ground and mapping the distance the waves travel in a set period of time. The radar travels farther where the soil is looser and travels a shorter distance when harder surfaces are encountered. GPR was laid out in blocks, targeting different aspects of the site. These included the location of the rectangular Morrison Scove kilns, as shown on the Sanborn Fire Insurance maps, the location of a prisoner's barracks as shown on the circa 1894 historic photograph, the walled courtyard where a note on engineering plans indicated there might be burials, the drying room, and other locations. The GPR specialists analyzed the results, and the archaeologists then investigated select locations. The GPR identified rectangular shape features in the kiln area, and machine trenching revealed the intact floor of one of the Scove kilns. Machinery was used to investigate features due to asphalt pavement and depth. The GPR indicated some structural elements in the location of the barracks, and while the archaeologists did not expect to find anything notable in this trench, since the barracks were on raised pier footings, in the profile wall of this trench they found a 15-foot wide band of brick rubble. This, they speculated, may have been placed underneath the wooden floor of the barracks to serve as a barrier in the event the prisoners tried to escape by tunneling out from underneath the structure. Above this brick layer, they found a deposit of ash and cinders, possibly left from a December 1900 fire that destroyed the factory.
Architectural debris in the wall here, just rubble and brick, but underneath it, we actually have another different color stain, which tells us that there was something architectural here as well.
And underneath the brick layer, they found what appeared to be a surface formed by wooden planks, perhaps representing the floor of an earlier dwelling when the prisoners were held in a stockade.
We're not finding intact architectural remains, but we are finding the evidence of what is left of them, and that tells us where something was was in this location. And also within the fill, we were finding a lot of domestic refuse, so just bottles, faunal remains, metal hardware, shoe parts. So in its own way, it tells a story of the people that once lived here.
In front of the barracks trench, the archaeologists found more foundations, ones that did not appear on the maps or in the historic photograph. Archaeology, in attempting to answer questions, sometimes finds new questions, and the purpose of these foundations is unknown. Doing archaeology is like solving a puzzle when you never have all the puzzle pieces, and sometimes you need to solve the puzzle using pieces from different boards. In examining the historic Edwards photograph showing the prisoners at the well, the archaeologists recognized there were a series of scuffed lines going toward the foreground of the photograph and away from the factory. They determined these must have been the scuff lines made by the prisoners when walking wearing shackles. Projecting where these lines went, they recognized that the lines marked the path that the prisoner laborers would have walked, going to an outhouse that was found during an earlier archaeological study of the site. The artifacts recovered there, a broken tobacco pipe bowl, a snuff bottle, and a pharmaceutical bottle, and others, may reflect some of the things the least prison laborers may have used to temporarily escape the tragedy of their lives.
First thing I know, I was jailhouse bound, well, I got in jail, with my mouth poked out, well, now I'm in the pen, and I can't get out, It's long gone, It's long gone, what you want, It's long gone, oh, long gone, what you want, well, the dawn made, there's a parachute, well, the funniest shoe, that was ever seen, had a heel in front, and a heel behind, well, it didn't know where, that the boy was blind, It long